UK government's foreign policy overhaul, which identifies Russia as the biggest threat to security. There'll also be a bigger focus in the future on India and the Pacific. And there is an alarming prediction that a terrorist group is likely to launch a successful nuclear, chemical or biological attack by 2030. Well, Sophie Gaston is director of the independent think tank, the British Foreign Policy Group, and joins us now. Hello, good afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
It's hard to start anywhere other than with nuclear weapons. I thought the UK was under a legal obligation to reduce its stockpile rather than increase.
Yeah, so traditionally the UK had been quite ambiguous about the actual size of our stockpile. It's not something that we really want to sing and dance about. We've moved into a new era of greater transparency around that. I think people are right to have their eyebrows raised at this because, of course, Britain has very much been a strong advocate for nuclear disarmament, and even though we've had a nuclear capability, and Trident remains an important part of our security framework, I think there had been a sense that you want the direction of travel to be in one way. That said, I think it's important to recognize that the UK, we still have fewer nuclear weapons in our arsenal than a lot of our other peers in this space. And what's interesting about this is the way in which these new nuclear weapons will, be put in place and how they can work is really that it's about extending our capacity on a deterrent level, not just to be protecting the UK, but actually it increases our capability to uphold security in the European region as a whole. So I think we should probably view this in the context of Britain actually stepping up, really wanting to take a much bigger role in the leadership of NATO, and actually us contributing more to this idea of European regional autonomy.
Is there an element, when we talk about nuclear weapons, of it being a vanity project, particularly in light of the report earlier this week that, more sort of prosaic elements of the armed forces' capabilities would leave them seriously outgunned if it ever came to a conventional conflict?
Well, I think we're obviously increasing spending on a range of different areas of our defence and security. The settlement that was given to the Ministry of Defence in the autumn last year ahead of the publication of the review was the biggest injection of cash really since the Cold War. So it's not true that we're not spending. It's just that we're taking decisions about where best we invest those resources. And the government has decided that nuclear is a genuine and growing threat, but also that we need to invest in cyber and digital capabilities, because so much of the warfare these days is not about troops on the ground. It's actually about, it's being fought in cyberspace. It's about these sorts of hybrid, what we call hybrid warfare, where, you have actors, hostile states that are trying to, get in computer systems, satellites, and so on. So I think what we see in this review is the government trying to take a much more expansive view to what our resilience and national security entails. And a lot of the investments are going into the digital space. And of course, you have to think about the hard choices at stake there. They've clearly decided that the boots on the ground of traditional warfare is just not where we need to be focusing our attentions moving forward.
You can understand why they want this focus on India and the Pacific. The report calls it the world's growth engine. Is our interest there likely to be reciprocated?
I think absolutely. The sense that I think the British government got in their consultations, and it's important to remember there was a lot of consultation that went on with our allies around the world in the development of this review. I think the very strong sense was we absolutely welcome Britain as a kind of positive force in the Indo-Pacific region, but they very much wanted a sense that this wasn't just a kind of faddish passing interest, but this was going to be a longer term commitment. So you see that set out in the review. They're saying, look, we're not going to try and reinvent the wheel here. We can never compete with or have the kind of stake the Pacific powers do. But this is where there's going to be a huge degree of particularly economic and security dynamism. A lot of the action is going to be taking place in the Indo-Pacific. We need to have a foot in all of that. We need a seat at the table. So you'll see that the Indo-Pacific, it's not just about us sort of sending battleships there. We're not necessarily going to have an enormous defense and security presence there, but we want to get involved in trade. We want to be working with partners in the region on issues like climate change. And basically, we just want to say, absolutely, Europe is the center of our kind of security framework, but, we understand and recognize the importance of Indo-Pacific, and really it's just going to be a hub of activity over the next decade, and we don't want to be left behind.
And look, I suppose it goes with the territory. If you have a report that paints a picture of what foreign policy will be like in the years to come, we've already dealt with nuclear weapons. There will be things that stand out to you. This prediction of a terrorist group likely to launch a successful nuclear, chemical or biological attack by 2030 suggests that counterterrorism will be central to any plans in the future for the UK government.
Absolutely. I mean, it's pretty sobering. I think what the pandemic has done in a way is just sharpen minds within government to the complexity of new threats. And I think to some extent we realized that in retrospect we were probably a bit overdue a pandemic. And I think there's probably a little bit of a sense of that around biological and chemical warfare, that in a way almost we've been lucky in the past that this is not something we've been having to face on a huge scale here in the UK. But look, I think we should see that as obviously quite an alarming statement, but also, at least they're recognizing it. That's the first point of strategic advantage. That's the best way we can tackle this, is recognizing and taking seriously these potential threats. And I think the British people should see that as a signal that the government's going to be taking this very seriously moving forward.
Hey, great to have you on the programme. Thank you very much. That's Sophia Gaston talking about the UK government's new foreign policy initiatives. Right, let's talk about the Duke of Edinburgh then, because after